Hello, I'm Alan Pulverness. This is Pete Clements. We're speaking on behalf of TransformELT, an independent language consultancy based in the UK. We're going to be talking about formative assessment. And we've called the talk Letting Learners In on the Process, making learners part of what we do for formative assessment.
Okay, so there's going to be three quick parts to this talk. The first one, we're going to describe what formative assessment is. Next, we'll give some examples of formative assessment strategies that will be used in the classroom or within our planning. And then we're going to talk about some key areas of challenge in embedding formative assessment practices and possibly some solutions. We're going to relate these challenges specifically to the context that we've been working in, which is embedding formative assessment practices in classrooms within the Southeast Asia region.
So first of all, what is formative assessment? It's assessing learners' comprehension and understanding as part of the learning process, rather than simply waiting to the end of a period of learning and assessing their achievement as summative assessment. Formative assessment, as the name suggests, is part of development for learners, and something which we believe, many people believe, is a valuable and essential part of learning. In fact, it's widely acknowledged, and it's a feature of mainstream education, for example, in the UK and in many other contexts worldwide. And we're interested to explore whether it's as much a part of teachers' practice in English language teaching contexts as we believe it should be. So drawing on work by Leahy, Lyon, Thompson and Wiliam in 2005, they identified a number of key strategies for formative assessment. Firstly, clarifying, making explicit and understanding learners' learning intentions, where they want to get to and how they know that they're succeeding along the way. So making the criteria for success explicit. It involves engineering effective classroom tasks and questions that elicit, that draw out evidence of learning, and providing feedback that is actually feed forward. It's not just letting learners know how they've done, what the results are of what they've done, but how they can move on, how they can move forward based on what they've done. And it's also importantly enlisting students as actors, as agents in this process, not simply being on the receiving end of constructive feedback, but also helping and supporting each other, of becoming instructional resources for their classmates. And I mentioned the idea of students becoming agents, and this is very important, as students need to be influential. They need to have a strong influence on their own learning. They need to be originators and initiators and actors in their learning, and not simply the recipients of what the teacher has planned and provided.
So a useful metaphor in relation to embedding formative assessment is talking about the learning journey. There are three parts to the learning journey. First one is establishing where are my learners going in their learning journey, and the strategies that we might use in the classroom to help learners establish this would be to set clear lesson or learning objectives. And as part of those objectives, we would also make it clear how learners can achieve those goals and objectives. So what is the success criteria? The next part of the journey would be to establish where are the learners now in their learning. So we know what the objectives are, but we need to understand what learners can already do or what they already know about a topic or what skills they already have in order to understand how they can move forward and what they need to move forward. So there's various strategies we might use in the classroom to help establish this, from starters, which establish what learners already know, plenaries, which show what they've learned within a lesson, for example, and what information gaps they still have, or knowledge skills gaps they still have. Know, want, and learn charts, so establishing what learners already know, what they want to know about a topic, and during the learning process across a unit or a sequence of lessons, what have they learned at different stages. Effective questioning is also a very important strategy, which teachers use very often. And of course, discussions, effective monitoring from the teachers, and self and peer assessment. Moving on, final stage would be, how do I help my learners move forward in their learning? So we've established where the learners are now. What can I do to help those learners move forward? Well, giving them effective feedback would be one strategy to use, feedback that's constructive and helpful. Making on-the-run decisions as a teacher, where the planned learning that you have might change based on emergent needs, needs that come up or arise from the learners during the learning process, and we might change what we've planned in order to better react to learners' needs. Within that, we might then do some deliberate practice of certain skills or of vocabulary and grammar, for example, that we realize that learners actually have gaps in their knowledge. We might do some deliberate practice on that. And then also formative assessment for planning. So this isn't just something that happens during one particular lesson, it happens over a sequence of lessons. And as the teachers, we might use information we've gathered about the learners from one lesson to inform our planning in the next lesson.
So we'd like to conclude by looking at a number of key challenges based on the work that we've been doing in Southeast Asia context. Firstly, how can we encourage buy-in from teachers? How can we get teachers to accept and support and become part of this process, or make formative assessment part of their practice? Equally, how can we encourage the same involvement and support and commitment from learners? And finally, how can we develop a culture of reflection amongst teachers, but equally amongst learners?
So the first point, how do we encourage buy-in from our teachers? Well, first of all, we want teachers to be aware of exactly what formative assessment is. We want them all to be on the same level with their understanding, a base level of understanding of what formative assessment is and why it's important and why we should try and apply these strategies. This is getting everyone to a certain level of understanding, make them feel informed. We want to encourage experiment in the classroom, reflecting on your teaching practice, and collaboration between teachers is very much a collaborative process that might involve peer observation, for example. And it's important to note that, like, formative assessment isn't something, these strategies aren't something that that come necessarily automatically. There might be things teachers need to practice over a period of time as well, and reflect on areas for development and things that went well. Also, it's important to get buy-in from teachers is for them to recognise the value formative assessment has for the learners. So learners are very active in this process, and by embedding formative assessment strategies, we get to help the learners move forward, and hopefully teachers will notice the progress that their learners make. This will encourage them to use formative assessment strategies more often. Providing guidance is very important. We said getting everyone on level when it comes to understanding formative assessment is not necessarily the same as being able to apply formative assessment strategies. So in order to do that, we can help by providing guidance. This might be in the form, for example, of practical training manuals for teachers to help embed some of these strategies, or to ideas to help try them out, for example. It's important to focus on the fact that for teachers, this is a developmental process. As I said, this might be something that takes a long time. It's not necessarily something that happens automatically and teachers are very good at straight away. But we don't want teachers to feel that this is something that is evaluative, like they're going to be judged on their ability to do this and be graded as a certain level of teacher because they can apply these strategies. This is a developmental process for teachers, just as it is for the learning journey is for learners. And it's very important in the context we've been working in Southeast Asia to relate these strategies to contexts with large classes. So for example, in Thailand and Vietnam, often the class size is 35 plus learners. So it's important to make sure that, it's important to make sure that teachers understand how to embed formative assessment within a large class context.
And how can we encourage the same commitment, the same involvement from learners? Firstly, we can, as the title of this talk goes, let them in on the process, explain the ideas that we've been discussing here, give them the metaphor of the learning journey, help them to understand the process and understand the reason for these practices in the classroom. Learner training is crucial and includes, importantly, identifying criteria for success, answering the question that learners might ask themselves: how do I know that I've made progress? How do I know that I've succeeded? So supplying criteria for success and giving learners training in how to provide constructive and focused feedback for their classmates. Feedback is quite a delicate interaction, and it needs to be seen as something constructive and developmental, not simply critical, not simply finding fault, but recognizing how your fellow learners are making progress, are doing things better and better. So giving focused and constructive feedback is something, it's a skill or a set of skills that requires training for learners that doesn't perhaps come naturally. And sharing that focused feedback in terms of goals, success criteria, and next steps.
So finally, how do we develop a culture of reflection? So one step along the way to help both teachers and learners to reflect on their practice and on their learning is to have reflection as habit, as in we do it very often. It's not the case of just reflecting at the end of the term. This can be a lesson by lesson process. We want to give opportunities throughout the learning journey to help learners reflect on their practice, and for teachers to reflect on how well they can embed formative assessment and which particular strategies might be benefiting the learners the most. Visible thinking routines can be very useful in the classroom. I spoke before about know, want, learn routine. It's a good way for the learners to verbalize the thinking and their knowledge and skills within what they already know about what they can do in a certain area or certain topic. We've also got I used to think this, but now I think that, to show what's changed along the way during the learning, how the learning has progressed or moved forward. Tangible outcomes are also very important. They motivate learners to be producing some kind of an end product to a lesson or series of lessons, and they can create a portfolio of evidence of their learning as the journey progresses. The good thing about this is these don't have to be isolated products on separate topics. They might be using similar skills and progressing, finding evidence of how they've progressed in particular skill areas as a crossover to different topics. Like teacher, like learner, developing a mindset for reflection. So for a lot of us, it's not easy to reflect on our practice. We're not often willing to accept what we do well, and we're perfectionists, for example. And sometimes it's hard for us to accept also our areas for development. So if we do this as teachers and we model it in our practice as teachers, hopefully that can reflect well on the learners as well. And it's something that they will be happier to do. But this does take time to develop that mindset. And a take-home point for today is that embedding formative assessment is a collaborative process. It's collaborative, learner to learner, teacher to learner, and also learner to teacher. We can learn a lot from our learners, just as they can hopefully learn from us. It's not a competitive process, and we should really emphasize that. It's all about collaboration between all parties. It's not about being the most successful among your peers, for example, or being the best teacher.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.